Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. And yes, today we are doing a same day sourdough loaf of bread. This is going to be a boule, which is B-O-U-L-E, or bowl or boule, or however people want to pronounce it. So this is going to be what is usually done in a Dutch oven. It'll be the round one with the scoring and all the pretty work and all that good stuff. We are doing it in the same day from beginning to end. Now, with that being said, you need to start this. Say if you go to bed between 9 and 10 o'clock, the latest you can start this is at 11 a.m. If something happens to come up, you can pause this at pretty much any time. And by pause, I mean stick it in the refrigerator and just leave it until you can come back to it and get it done. With that being said, you need to at least have the first 3 hours open, because you need to mix the dough and you need to do your stretch and folds. After that, you can pause it at any time for up to 3 or 4 days if you need to, and there's not going to be anything wrong with your bread. But if you have a whole day and you're like, I am going to do this, I'm going to give you a no-fail bread recipe and instructions in this video to doing a same-day bake of a loaf of bread. Now, we're going to start out with our sourdough starter. This is where the conditions of a no-fail bread comes into play, because it doesn't matter. I've done this with straight out of the fridge sourdough starters. I've done this with unfed sourdough starters. I've done it unfed straight out of the refrigerator, and I've done it at peak. Now, active sourdough starters means that you are going to have fed it within 12 to 24 hours. Now, I have done sourdough throughout my teenage years up until now, off and on. But for the last 7 years, I have consistently kept some kind of sourdough starter. I have had 2 over the last 10 years or so, and this one has been the best one. Now, if you would like to purchase my actual starter, I do have it in my Etsy store, link down below in the description. I have a regular white one, and I also have an einkorn sourdough starter. So both of your choices will be in that link. This sourdough starter I fed last night. Now, that being said, I'm not going to get into all of this measuring and weighing and hydration percentage, and I'm not going to get into all of that. Because once you have a mature starter and you actually learn your starter, you're not going to need any of that. So, if I'm using this on a consistent basis, I'm going to do equal parts flour and water. Now, you will notice that over time, it will get a little more watery and you'll have to give it a little extra flour sometimes. Now, if you are doing like a big bulk bake, which is what I will be doing over the next 2 or 3 days, because we have a show coming up and I'm going to make a bunch of bread to take with me, you want to feed it a little bit of a stronger feeding, meaning you want more flour than water. Consistency wise, whenever you use equal parts flour and water, it's going to be like a thicker pancake batter. It's still kind of runny and stirrable and smooth. Well, whenever you need it to be really active and really strong, you want to feed it a little more flour, which is going to make it a little bit thicker. I can't show you that now because it's already done risen, but it would be kind of like if you were stirring to make like drop biscuits. It would be almost that thick. And that's the way I fed this one last night. Let me show you what it looks like. Okay, this is Olivia. Say hi, Olivia. So this is Olivia, and you will see she's got lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of bubbles. This rubber band right here is where she started. Right here, that's where she started last night after I fed her. So it was like down, like there's a curve, a little bit of a curve. So she was about 3/4 of an inch deep with unfed starter. I dumped 2 cups of flour in here, just heaping cups. I didn't really measure, just 2 heaping cups of flour, and then enough water to stir it to where I could get my spoon to move. It wasn't so thick that I couldn't stir it, but it was enough to where, kind of like, you know, biscuit dough, not the rollout kind, but the drop kind, to where it will hold its shape. And that's the way this was. I actually fed her 16 hours ago, and she is still at peak. And I'm sure if I was to use this, she might even keep rising because there's so much food in here, aka the flour. So what we are going to do, I'm going to give you the recipe down below. It is for 2 loaves. You can half it. So I will do a 2 loaf recipe and a 1 loaf recipe, just to make it easier for you guys to just, you know, copy, paste, screenshot it, whatever you want to do. Write it down real quick. So that way you have a 1 loaf and a 2 loaf. I'm going to be doing 2 loaves at a time because, like I said, I've got an event coming up and I've got to start getting these things lined up for the next couple of days. So here is our sourdough starter, and we're going to get started. Now, when I make this bread, I do weigh my ingredients. That's just what I do. If you want to weigh them and then say pour them into measuring cups or something like that, if you want to do something like that and convert it into your own cup measurements, you can. That's where there's going to be variation in how your bread turns out, because if you have sifted flour, it's going to take a lot more flour than if it was just straight out of the bag or straight from the mill or something like that. That's going to be a little bit more packed, so you're actually going to use less. That's where the differentials comes in with using a scale versus cups. Now, if you make this recipe and you get really good at it and you can eyeball it, then more power to you. But I'm going to stick with weighing it because I do have these at events to sell. So I've got to make sure that each of them come out as close to perfect every time that I can. So I'm actually going to do this in the measured grams. Now, if you don't have a scale, just go to Walmart and Dollar General and get you one for like 10 bucks. We use it for all kinds of stuff. Like even when I'm canning, when I'm cooking, when I'm, you know, anything. We use it for everything. Even our freeze-dried stuff. We have to weigh our freeze-dried stuff. And so, you know, if you want to know if something's dehydrating, you can weigh it and see if it's still decreasing in weight, it's still losing water. So it's still got water in it. So even with stuff like that, you can use a scale for. It's not going to be one of those purchases that you make and you never use again. Especially if you continue to make this delicious bread. Okay, so let's get started. And I'll explain to you what I'm doing as we're doing it. So first of all, here is our scale. And it's pretty plain Jane, pretty simple. I will leave a link for this one down below, or something similar. I don't even know if they carry this brand anymore, but I'll leave a link for a scale in the description below. So on this one, this is the power button, and then this is the unit. On this one, you can do pounds, ounces, grams, pounds and ounces. So you just click the unit button until you get to what you're using. And then as you put stuff on here or in the bowl, you can what's called tear it out. And once you tear it, it brings it back to 0. So for the first thing that I do is I actually sit my bowl on the scale before I even start. And that way, whenever I turn it on, it's already zeroed out. So for this recipe, I like to start out with my 4-quart bowl. You can go down to 3 quarts if you need to, but this is just a 4-quart bowl, and I like to use clear ones so I can see kind of what the dough is doing around the edges. So we are going to first power it on, and it's going to be 0. And then I've got to change it to grams because Stephen had it outside doing freeze-dried stuff. And so now we've got it in grams. And the first thing you always want to do with sourdough is measure out your sourdough starter and your water together so you can dilute the sourdough starter, and then it's more evenly dispersed in your flour instead of adding your flour to the sourdough starter and it all getting clumped up and you have inconsistent mixtures. So this way we're going to start with our sourdough and water first. And by the way, here's the recipe. If you can read my chicken scratch, but I'll have it typed below. So we're going to first start out with 725 grams of water. I do like to start out with warm water. Didn't cut off on me. because it makes the process go just a little bit faster. So we've got 725 grams of water. Make sure you're not touching your bowl as you're pouring this in. Okay. And then this is where you hit tare, and it's going to zero it back out. And now we need 250 grams of sourdough starter. And here is my starter if you want to see what it looks like beforehand. All them bubbles. Okay, and then 250. One test to see if your sourdough is active is that it floats. Now 250 grams of sourdough starter is going to be about a cup. I do know that. Okay. So at this point I am going to use a Dutch whisk. I mean a Danish whisk. You can just use a fork or a spoon at this point. So you don't have to have any special equipment. I'm just going to use this one. We're going to mix it all up. Now regarding the water, you want to make sure that, mamas, it's about the bottle temperature, about 100 degrees or so. Because if you get it too hot, anything over I think 120, you'll start killing your yeast. And that defeats the purpose. So, if you want to use cold water, you can use cold water. It's just going to take a little longer. So I like to use warm water. Okay, so, alright, from here I'm going to need the scale again. Okay, now we're going to add our salt. And the salt is 25 grams. I use Redmond's real salt. And I've learned that 25 grams is about 2 tablespoons or so. Alright, got a little extra. That's okay. And you can always measure this out before you start dumping it in there, just in case you get too much like that. And you don't want that much. Maybe you want to take it out. Well, it's too late now. So you can do this individually if you want to, and then pour it into a bowl. Now our next step is going to be to add the flour. And this is going to be 1,000 grams of flour. That's probably going to be about all I got. We'll get some more. Okay. And now we mix. Now if you want to start out with a fork and then move to your hands, you can. Like I said, I'm just going to use this dough hook real quick. Get it stirred up. And then I'm actually going to move over to my hands, because this doesn't mix it exactly the way I want it. Alright, once all my liquid is gone, then I like to swap over to my hands. Alright, make sure you have clean hands, because you don't want to introduce any bad bacteria into your dough. Alright, so we're just going to kind of squish, pull, rotate, just work it all in there, get on the bottom, flip it over some. And I like to do this for, a couple of minutes, just to make sure everything is well incorporated. Make sure you scrape everything off the bottom. I still see some flour stuck down there. And all of your dough should look the same. You don't want some dry spots and some shiny spots, because the shiny spots are too wet, the dry spots are too dry. So make sure you've got it all incorporated. And this is what they call a shaggy dough. It's going to be really messy, really sticky, and so it goes. It's called a shaggy dough. So I just like to get everything off my hands as best I can. Okay. Now, here is our shaggy dough. And we're going to let this sit for an hour. So now, to help people understand the different processes that we go through, I'm going to try to explain a little bit. So what we've made now is our shaggy dough. And this is just to mix the flour, water, and salt and with the sourdough. That's all we've done, is just mix it all together. We haven't gotten to anything hard or anything like that. We're just mixing it together. Now this is going to start the process of the flour absorbing the water, getting soft, getting incorporated, as well as the sourdough starter is going to start feeding on the flour that you just fed it. So it's going to start that fermentation process, but this is not where you're going to get your rise, because it takes usually about 4 hours before the yeast starts to have the byproduct of gas, aka farting. That's where you get your bubbles, because anytime bacteria is eating something like the flour, like your wild yeast is eating the flour, it's going to produce gas, and that's where you get those bubbles. And same thing is if you were eating cabbage and broccoli and stuff like that, there's bacteria that's on the cabbage and broccoli and in the green leaves itself that is actually eating the bad bacteria in your gut. Therefore, it's producing gas. That's why green stuff makes you have a lot of gas. More or less the same thing going on in bread. So your yeast that you have, your good bacteria, sourdough starter, it's going to start eating on this flour, and the byproduct is going to be the gas with the bubbles. So that's not going to happen for about another 4 hours or so, depending on how warm your house is. If your house is below, say, 72-ish, you have to know your sourdough starter. Some like 70, some like 75. It just kind of depends on your environment. I'm going to say around 72. If your house is any cooler than that, you might actually want to do a few things. You could set this in your microwave. Like you could actually run it for a minute empty, and then put your sourdough dough like in the microwave and just leave it there for this hour. You could have just cooked something and your stove be warm. You could turn it on just a hair to warm it up if it's a cold stove, if you need to put it in there. But what I really like to do is, if I have a bowl that is that I'm using that's small enough to fit inside another bowl, you could actually set it inside, like take this whole bowl and set it inside another bowl of warm water. That is if your house is on the colder side, to help kind of speed this process up. Now, it being almost 70 degrees outside today, my house is about 73. This is going to be fine on the stove because I did use the warm water. So we're just going to let this sit on the stove for an hour. Like I said, this is not to rise. This is actually to start the breakdown of the flour, to kind of activate it to where that way when we start doing our stretch and folds, you're going to start seeing that gluten develop, and that's where we're going to start getting the stretches. Your dough is going to become more smooth. It's going to become that pretty dough that you see everybody have. That's what this is going to turn into. And then once we do our stretch and folds and you know, develop that gluten and that bond with having that flexible soft dough, then that's when we get into the rising part, because that's when it is well incorporated, it has started eating, and then it has more or less digested the carbs, and it's going to start producing that gas to make the rise. Okay, so with all that being said, because I don't want to explode your brains right now, we are just going to cover this. Now, what I do, because, you know, I don't want to use up all my towels, and, you know, frankly, some of my towels, they just dry out too fast. I like to use a shower cap. Now, this shower cap it's actually satin on one side and that plastic stuff on the other. I actually put the plastic side down because I don't want this satin part to start absorbing water and cause any kind of bacteria. With the plastic side or the vinyl or whatever the heck this is, with this side being down, it's wipeable. So any kind of sweat or anything you get on it, you can actually start wiping that off if you need to. Okay, so we're just going to put this over. This is kind of like one of them fancy bowl covers, you know, that you see people making. So this is just going to go over the dough bowl. It's going to sit here for an hour. We're not going to do anything to it. Go ahead and set your timer. You can set your timer, and I would start about 50 minutes. At about 50 minutes, you can come in here and start. You can take a peek and see if you need to. You can go ahead and actually start doing your stretch and folds that if you kind of have to do a little crunch time. But I'm going to set my clock for an hour, and then we're going to come back, and then we're going to start doing our stretch and folds. Alright, so it's been an hour. We need to start our stretch and folds. And you'll see there's not much change in the dough. It's still shaggy. Alright, now what I want to do is I'm going to get, like, you can get a bowl or just some kind of vessel to hold some water. And it's better to do your stretch and folds if your hands are wet, because you don't want to add flour to it because you're still incorporating all the flour. So you need to wet your hands just a little bit, just enough to keep the dough from sticking to them. So what I like to do is just wet my hands. And then for the stretch and folds, we're going to dig in deep, pull up, and stretch it over. And you can wet your hands in between each time if you would like. Scoop around, pull up, and fold over. Scoop around, pull up, and fold over. And you want to do this at least 4 times. If your dough will allow, you can do it a little bit more. But you'll start to feel that resistance. See, there it is. I can't really pull it back up. And you'll feel that resistance, and you'll know that's when you stop. Okay, so from here, we need to set our timer for 30 minutes. We'll come back and do it again in 30 minutes. All right, here's round number 2. Just gonna wet my hands real quick. I'm gonna dig in. Up and over. Up and over. One more. See if we can get one more. Yeah, that was it. Alright, and I like to get it down off the sides. Okay, cover, and I'll see you back in 30 minutes. Alright, here's number 3. You'll learn to feel the difference each time you do it in the dough. What it feels like and all that good jazz. And there's a bubble right there. Alright, that's as far as she says she's gonna go this time. Alright, cover up. See you back at 30. Round number 4. Okay, so with this being the 4th stretch and fold, we are going to allow this to sit for 2 hours. This is called a bulk ferment on the counter, but we're just going to do it for 2 hours, and then we will come back and we will shape it. Let me show you, like I said, whenever I took all of the starter out to make this dough, it was down to this rubber band, and it's in an hour, no, 2 hours, it's already done risen about another inch. So it had plenty of food in it. So we just shaped our bread, and now we are going to let it cold ferment or retard, or whatever term you want to use it, in the refrigerator for at least 2 hours. This is where you can leave it overnight, or you can leave it 2 or 3 days. Now if you're going to leave it a couple of days, make sure that it is airtight. You may want to slip it in a Walmart bag, cover it with saran wrap, whatever you want to do, just so it doesn't dry out. But if you're just going to leave it in there a couple hours like I'm going to do, then the way I did it is just fine, and I've never had any problems. So I'll see you back in a second. Okay, so we're getting ready to cook the bread. I put the oven on 500, and I stuck my Dutch ovens in the oven to preheat. It only takes about 20 minutes. So the next step is we are going to take it out, and we've also got to score our bread. So I'm going to take the Dutch ovens out first and get them ready, and then we will take the bread out of the refrigerator and get them scored. Now I have these little handy dandy things. I don't know how well they work, because last time I used one, my bread was like too big and it actually went out over the sides. I had to put some parchment paper under it. So I'm going to use them again, see how they do this time. I think my bread last time was a little bit too warm. So we're just going to take our bread and aim for the center. Now if your tea towel gets stuck like this, you can either gently pull it, or you can actually wet your tea towel on the back side and it will actually come off. I'm going to go ahead and score this so I can go ahead and get it in my Dutch oven. I'm not going to do anything just fantastically pretty, because I've just got to get this cooked. So we've got one big score. And then I just like to do some fancy wheat. Okay. And then this is going to go into the Dutch oven. You can put flour on top of these if you want, and do all kinds of little fancy scores and all that good stuff. You can make it as fancy and pretty as you want. Okay, and then this one goes in the Dutch oven as well. Okay, so those are going to bake for 35 minutes with the lid on. Now you can do several different things depending on the crust that you want. You can actually put water in a cookie sheet underneath the Dutch ovens to create steam in the oven. You can put ice cubes inside of your Dutch oven to create the steam, or you can do without steam. It is totally up to you. But we're going to bake these at 500 degrees for 35 minutes. And then once that time is up, we're going to turn it down to 425, take the lid off, and we're going to bake it for 10 minutes. And then it'll be done. See you back in a second. magic. See what they look like. Oh, it's so pretty. So pretty. Ah, that one's got a big old ear on it. Huge. Alright. Now I do like to go ahead and take these out. Set them on the rack. Let them cool. These little silicone things are hot too. Alright. Okay, so now that these are going to actually sit overnight, because the rule of thumb is cook sourdough one day and cut it the next. But you can still eat it warm. Just know that it may dry out a little bit, because when you cut it, it releases that moisture. I'm actually going to leave these sitting out since it's 8, 9 o'clock at night. I'm going to go ahead and just leave these sitting out, and then I actually bag mine up for sale. I'll start doing that tomorrow. But I wanted to show you a partial loaf. This is a pretty little wheat design that I did. Looked pretty cute. And it had one of them big ears on it too. But I just wanted to show you the inside of what they look like. This is just a normal loaf. This is a couple of days old, so it has gotten a little stiff, a little gummy. But you can see squishes really well. Still has the oven spring in it. Now, to reheat these, because you see this one is really, really soft. I do keep mine in semi-plastic paper bags because, like I said, I sell them. I like to keep mine in more of a plastic setting instead of a cloth bag, because I like mine soft. If you like yours hard, then you want to keep it, out in the open. If you want to reheat this, you can always slice it and toast it. I did some here the other night. I sliced and just toasted in the skillet. I put some Redmond's real salt on it, and we had that as our part of our bread for supper. But as a loaf that's whole, if you want to reheat it, you can spritz it with a little bit of water and then put it back in the oven on 350 for 10 minutes, and it will come out exactly like these are right now. If you want to keep it soft, you can put it in the microwave with a cup of water and heat it up for a minute, and that steam will heat it thoroughly and still keep it soft, just like you see here. Otherwise, just cut it and enjoy it however you want. Let me know what you do. Let me know how yours turns out. And if you are on Instagram, tag at boots.bounty.homestead, because I want to see your loaf that you made with my recipe. So, yeah. I hope you enjoy it. And if you have any questions, just reach out to me and let me know. We'll see you next time, guys. Thank you, and bye-bye.